Guys, I'm selfishly very excited to share this interview with the rest of the world. And I get to speak to a journalist. His name is Harvey Araton. And Harvey's going to be sharing some of his insights today with the rest of us. And what he's going to be talking about is his experience as a journalist growing up. He got to cover the New York Knicks. He got to cover athletics at a very, very deep and high level. And we get to talk about what journalism was like, a little bit earlier on as compared to now, and what some of the struggles these journalists are going through now to trying to adapt and building a brand and so forth. And some of the insights and stories he gives, you need to pay attention to, because it shows the difference in what it was like back then for print journalism as compared to now, and the access that these journalists used to have. And so he talks about that transition to the new world of journalism. But a big focus in our interview as well is about his new book. It's a children's book called The Goal of the Game, and it's a middle grade novel. And we're going to be talking about youth sports in general, and just some of the things we're going through with youth sports in today's world, and why he was motivated to write this book. He's written multiple books, over 10 books, and this one is his first children's novel. So he's going to explain what motivated him to get into this style of writing, to kind of share this with the world. So again, selfishly, extremely excited to share this with the world, because it's a journalist. It's someone who I admire, and I'm really excited for this one. So get ready. This is the Gametime Guru. So,
what time is it? Game time!
This is the Gametime Guru Podcast, where I interview sports figures from all over the world to help deliver a panoramic view on sports. So whether you're a former athlete, one of the crazies, or simply a casual sports fan, this is the perfect show for you, as we peel back the curtains and learn from our guests every single week. I'm your host, Shane Larson, and I'm helping you see sports through a different lens. What's up, everybody? Welcome out to another episode of the Gametime Guru Podcast. My name is Shane Larson, host of the show, and we are coming up right now on 9 full years running of the podcast. Super excited to be here with you guys. For those who have been along for the journey, thank you for joining in over the last 9 years. Now, if this is your first time tuning in, we get new listeners every single week. I truly appreciate all of you. So if it's your first time, welcome aboard. Excited to have you guys here. Now, really awesome opportunity to speak to someone who has had an amazing journalism career, to someone who's been in the industry for a while and understands sports from a deep angle, which is something that I strive to be like as I continue to grow in this profession. And as you guys heard in the introduction, we're bringing on Harvey Araton, and he's going to be chatting with us about his career, as well as, his new book coming out. We're going to be talking, focusing on youth sports. So Harvey, thanks for joining the show, sir.
Shane, nice to be with you, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. So I kind of want to rewind the clock. It was interesting when I got the introduction email. We were talking about they had mentioned the co-producing of ESPN's 30 for 30 when the Garden was Eden, which was regarding the 1970s Knicks team and so forth. So I was like, oh, wow. Okay. So I started kind of looking into your career, and I'm like, wow, like he was involved in some cool things. And what's fun for me is, like, as a 37-year-old, one of the things is that actually like brings me back into some of my early days of just loving storytelling. The ESPN 30 for 30 series for me, and I know a lot of my friends that were growing up with me in that era, love those. So I would love to touch base on that and like what went into co-producing the ESPN 30 for 30 documentary for the Knicks.
Well, for me, it was a very eye-opening experience, because I had spent, almost all of my career in print journalism. And I think it was around 2009 that I started working on the book of the same title, When the Garden was Eden. And I'm getting there. I'm getting up there in age, but I'm not old enough to have been around covering those great Knicks teams of the early 70s. In fact, I was in high school in New York City during those years, and so those guys were my childhood heroes. Then I got into the business, and most of them had retired by then as players, but you get to know them. You get to know these guys when they come back, as broadcasters or assistant coaches, things like that. And so I developed relationships with Willis Reed and Walt Frazier and Earl Monroe, all of these guys. And we had the idea of doing a book. There had been many books written on those teams in the 1970s, but from the perspective of 40 years later, it felt like a completely different kind of approach. And so I did the book. I believe it came out in 2011, and uh, about, I think it was 2 years later, we were approached by a group a couple of producers, including the guy who had produced the HBO hit show Entourage. And they chose Michael Rappaport, the actor and an avowed Knicks fan, to be the director. And so I signed on as a consultant and co-producer. And it was just really fun for me. I mean, I sat in on a lot of the interviews, conducted a couple of the interviews on my own, just to see it all condensed. I mean, it's like a 400-page book condensed into like an hour and 20-minute 30 for 30. So, for me at that stage of my career to be involved in, for instance, when they premiered the movie, it was at the Tribeca Film Festival, which is one of the power brokers of that festival is Robert De Niro. So that night, here I am taking photos with De Niro and Rappaport and all these guys, all these people in the film industry. And a lot of the players actually came to the premiere. We packed a large auditorium. So I have to say, it's, certainly late career, one of my absolute highlights.
Absolutely. I mean, that's just crazy to me. It's absolutely amazing. It's like one of those like dream come true type of moments. And it's kind of cool that you just had that experience. You got to do the interviews, you get to conduct some of it and be around it all. And what that kind of rolls me into, I guess, is the next question in the journalism phase. Like, obviously you mentioned just now, print journalism was kind of your main focus. Then you get into this aspect of it. What do you feel like as a journalist and someone who's had the experience in your career, like the shift in the way journalism is produced and the way it's consumed now? Is it better, worse? Like what's my question for you is like, how did you evolve into your journalism career? And then like, how do you feel like it's going now from a consumer standpoint?
Well, for me, since I was, kind of at the tail end of my uh, print career, working, on a daily basis for the New York Times, um, the shift wasn't too impactful, other than having to you know uh, promote our work on Twitter and Instagram and all the other apps that came along. Um, the difference, I would say, predominantly was in the way the professional sports teams and leagues perceive us in the conventional print media. I was just telling somebody the other day about how much more deferential, let's just say the NBA, which was my primary beat early in my career, how much more deferential David Stern, the commissioner, and the teams individually were toward print guys. I mean, we were our primary means of communications with their fan bases, before social media, before all these teams had their own networks, television networks, before there was NBA TV and NBA.com. It was the daily paper. So, back then, our access was so much better.
Sure.
I can remember maybe one of the biggest stories I ever broke was after the Dream Team in Barcelona, and we came back and Magic Johnson unretired after that wonderful experience in Barcelona. And I walked into the Utah Jazz locker room before a preseason game, and there sat Karl Malone all by himself, nobody else in the locker room, and he recognized me from being around the Dream Team all summer. And I said, "Hey man, what's up?" And he said, "Oh, hey, how are you? What's going on?" And I said, "Well, I'm here doing the Welcome Back Magic story. Everybody's doing it now, right?" And he looked at me and said, "I ain't no Magic Johnson fan. I'm a competitor." And then he proceeded to talk about how so many guys in the league didn't want Magic back because of their fears of HIV. A lot of it was unenlightened. It was only
Sure.
pretty much 10 years after the AIDS scourge to begin with. But there were real fears. And so I walked out of that locker room and called my editor and said, the story has changed completely. And she said, "I want you to get on a plane and go wherever you need to go to report this story out. and have it to us by Friday so we can run in Sunday's paper. Anyway, the reason why I tell you this, the reason why I bring this up is because we had that kind of access. There's probably no chance in hell that I could walk into an NBA locker room and find the star of the team sitting there by himself without a PR person to say, Carl will talk before the game, not now. And then make sure that all the reporters and media people are around before he does this one interview. But back in those days, it was if you found somebody in the locker room or at courtside, you just kind of moseyed up to them and did an interview. Today, it's much different. There's more media and less access, which adds up to a job that's much more difficult for the daily working press.
Interesting. Yeah, that's something I don't think the general public really thinks about. They know now that you have information at your fingertips. Anybody can be a media member, it feels like these days. I mean, they all have access to social media, but they don't realize like back then you were the access, like you had the access, but you were the communication source. I didn't even think about that. As somebody who went through the works of journalism in college at Boise State University, I was, that was kind of interesting too, because that was in the social media was starting to become a thing. But I even realized, as soon as TikTok became a thing, as soon as, Snapchat became a thing, Twitter was already a thing and it was starting to build. But like all these were still building when I was in college in the 2010 to 2020 era. And it was, it's interesting to see how it's shifted even now. Like podcasts weren't even a thing. I was like one of the first ones in my whole area here in Boise that started a podcast in 2017. And all of a sudden now they're like, everyone's got a podcast. Like, so it's just evolving. So interesting how it's evolved actually. Now I want to ask you on that storytelling component though, being around the athletes like you were able to be like during those timeframes, those stories like with the Magic Johnson comeback and the fear that players had. I love storytelling. I love getting to know people, like authentic relationships, because it helps me develop a little bit more deeper of an understanding for them. I'm curious for you, like just being around it your whole life, like how has storytelling and being the one telling the stories while you're extracting the stories, how has that shaped you as not only a fan, but just as somebody who's a professional in this world? Like how has storytelling kind of shaped your vision on athletics?
Well, I think sometimes, particularly fans watching it from afar, we tend to, it's easy to kind of see these guys as, just, I don't want to say like robots or machines, but it's all based on performance and emotion. So, and that's even more intensified today because of the access to gambling on phones, right?
Yeah,
Didn't have that back when I was starting. So all of this sadly can dehumanize the athletes
sure.
in ways that become unfair. So again, related to that kind of access we had, I mean, believe it or not, and some of the younger reporters I've gotten to know in the past 10, 12 years, they are shocked to find out that when in my early days covering the Knicks for the New York Post, we traveled with them. I mean, we were on the planes with them, and they were flying commercial airlines. Believe it or not, you had 7-foot guys. That the veterans would get first class, and if there weren't enough first class seats, the rookies and some of the lesser players were sitting in coach. But you could be a 6'9" guy curled up in a coach seat next to some just ordinary person sitting on a plane. On the planes, in the hotels, and believe it or not, like if we were playing a Friday night game in Atlanta against the Hawks, and they had a Saturday night game back at Madison Square Garden, the rule in the league is that you had to be in the city where next night's game was the night before in case of inclement weather or something like that. And so they would have a charter flight for that. And after the game, we'd be writing our stories. The players would get dressed and get on the bus, and the bus would actually wait for the writers covering the team to finish. And they'd be sitting there. I remember UB Brown sitting there, with his arms folded, like, when the hell are these guys going to finish their stories? They wanted to get home and get a good night's sleep for the next night's game. But that's the way it was. And while it could create some uncomfortable situations for you. I mean, if I ripped a player, uh, while we were on a 3-game road trip, and the next morning I get on the bus, and his girlfriend or wife has called him and said, "You're not going to believe what that jackass Harvey wrote about you." And I get on the bus, and he's looking right at me, with smoke coming out of his ears. It created some uncomfortable situations. You had to be prepared to defend your work. On the other hand, you thought twice before you took unnecessary cheap shots, because you did have, this close-up relationship. In later years, as the access became less and less, and as the PR people, kind of created these obstructions, um, it became easier to just kind of lob these grenades over the wall.
Yeah.
And I feel like today there's some wonderful storytelling. I'm not one of these guys who says back in my day. There are some just beautiful writers all around the country. There are a number of them that I follow at The Athletic, which has essentially replaced the New York Times sports section that I worked for many years. I just think it's a little more challenging to get that access and time with the subjects you want to write about. Just read a really nice story by a writer named Miran Fader, who writes for The Athletic now. She used to be at The Ringer, about the Cleveland Cavaliers forward, Mobley, which really got into his whole routine about doing meditation and stuff, and a lot about his background and family background. Those are the kinds of things I really appreciate. And as I also have done some teaching on the college level these last 10, 12 years, and I'll always have students come up to me saying, "Oh, professor, I'd like to make a career in journalism or sports journalism, but I read so much about, newspapers closing and cutting staff, and the business is unstable." And I always say the same thing to them. I don't want to lie to them and say, "Oh, it's great, jobs are aplenty." I just say that, in many respects, the formula that supported a lot of the middle class jobs back in my day when I was coming up doesn't exist anymore because of the internet and how it's been a process getting people to pay for journalism.
Yeah.
It's getting better and better now. I think more and more of the younger generation now is, not growing up with getting it for free. So that they're, willing to pay whatever it is, that's helping a lot. But at the same time, I always say to them that the means of delivering stories, whether it's video, whether it's online, whether it's through podcasting, blogging, all these things, is so much better than it was when I started. So I would encourage you to pursue that. It's just a different kind of business now, where you have to learn to do a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
You have to kind of build a brand. You look at the guys who are the most successful, whether it's Adrian Wojnarowski when he was dropping Woj bombs, Stephen A. Smith, Michael Wilbon, all these guys have been on TV. They've been, they've been in print, and now they're all podcasting. You've got to kind of like cultivate that brand in the absence of, the kind of jobs that were available when I was coming up.
Yeah, it's so crazy. It's cool though to hear your perspective on it. And I wanted to just touch base on the one thing you said. It's so interesting how like they can almost like dehumanize athletes now. It's like one of those things. And that's why that's one of the reasons, Harvey, I enjoyed this podcast, because I get to meet people like yourself, right? I get to meet people and hear their stories even. And it helps me remember that. Like I've talked to multiple athletes from all over the globe, different sports figures, coaches, journalists, athletic directors, whomever, trainers. And like, it's helped me when storylines pop up later on about so-and-so, and I might've had them on the show. And I'm like, no, dude, they're a person and they have a story. That some of those they're battling mental health problems and stuff, and they're trying to go through their own stuff. It helps me. That's why I really appreciate hearing stories, reading them, listening to them, watching them, whatever it is about athletes. And it brings the human side out of it. And I love it. And it like brings it to life. So I'm a huge fan of storytelling, and those who can do it well, whether it's through the written word or through storytelling on video journalism, whatever it is, I love it. So it's cool to see someone like yourself who knows how to do that and been in the industry for so long and has that experience just on all sides. Now, on the now that the discussion I want to kind of shift to is, first off, you're an author. That right there in and of itself is something that I envy. I'm not a great writer. That's why I'm doing podcasts. I used to write for websites, not a great writer, but I do want to write a book. Now, you've written books. You talked about When the Garden Was Eden, the book prior to the 30 for 30 documentary, but you also have a book coming out. It's a middle grade novel called The Goal of the Game. Can you talk to us a little bit about this? I love people who are like, I just aspire to be more like yourself, where you write a book with the knowledge you have. Talk to us about The Goal of the Game.
Well, The Goal of the Game is my 10th book.
Wow.
But it's my first writing for children. And some people might wonder, like, what the hell are you doing trying something at this point in my career? But I will say that sometime around the turn of the century, I want to say about, I think it was 2002, I wrote a column in the Times when I realized that ESPN had taken to televising every game of the Little League World Series. And it struck me that when I was growing up and pretty much into middle age, let's say, the only time you'd ever see a Little League World Series game on television was on ABC's Wide World of Sports, which is an old Saturday afternoon specialty show on ABC. And they would show the Little League Championship game from Williamsport. In fact, I grew up in Staten Island, New York, and one year, I think it was '64, one of our local teams won the Little League World Series, and the pitcher was a guy named Danny Yaccarino, who I went to high school with, came within one strike of a perfect game over Monterrey, Mexico. So I always kind of followed the Little League World Series a little bit. But it was that one game, and it was kind of a novelty to see 12-year-old kids playing in a championship format. And then suddenly I realized, like, wow, they're televising every game. And I started to think, are we celebrating kids in this way, or are we commercializing kids in this way, or even exploiting them? And I remember calling up a child sports psychologist or a sports child psychologist. He was not a child. And asking that question about kids being on TV. And he said, it's not a big deal that kids are on TV. They've been on game shows for generations. The problem is when you hold out that carrot for families, communities, what will they do to get their kids to that national spotlight? And we had just come off 2001, a year before that, where we had a major Little League scandal where a kid named Danny Almonte was pitching for a Bronx team that made it all the way to Williamsport. And it turned out he was like 16 years old. I mean, they just forged his birth certificate or something. And the whole thing blew up and it became a major scandal. It kind of went away because it was like basically 2 weeks before 9/11. So a little more important, news after that. But anyway, after that, I wrote a series of articles exploring the different issues in youth sports. I would say, for the next decade, I would occasionally go out and find a different angle. But all of those articles were obviously directed at parents. And at some point, I'd say about 3 years ago, I decided I wanted to write something where I spoke directly to children. And the reason why I chose the middle grade range, which is approximately 8 to 12, give or take, for readers, was because I feel like this is the age where children are the most vulnerable in terms of what kind of pressure they are put under. What are the stakes by which they're playing? In other words, if kids at 8 and 9 years old are being told, hey, if you're really good and if you really practice hard and you join this elite travel team and you play 12 months a year, you could get a college scholarship, right? There's a lot of that going on now in youth sports in this country. The New York Times, as a matter of fact, in July ran a story that described the youth sports culture now as a $40 billion industry.
Wow.
They actually reported and wrote the story through these two guys, Josh Harris and David Blitzer, who happened to be the owners of the Philadelphia 76ers, right? And they started a company called Unrivaled Sports that they're pouring a lot of money into, right? And they're not alone in terms of private equity investment in youth sports. And they're, buying or building these magnificent sports venues, and they are, national tournaments and everything. So we've come a long way, a very long way, from the days when youth sports was basically run by volunteer parents. And, maybe your parents came to watch you play 3 or 4 times a season. It's very much a high stakes industry now. And I'm not writing the book or suggesting in any interview that, we can make it go away. That ship has sailed. But the reason why I wrote the book was to send a message to children or convey a message and to their parents who might read the book with them that at that particular age group, 8 to 12, 7 to 11, however you want to classify it, if you're not playing sports for the purest reasons, and those are to develop a love for the game, to develop some skills, to learn how to be a good teammate, be coachable, feel good about yourself physically and mentally, learn to deal with teammates from all different kinds of backgrounds. If those aren't the reasons that you're playing at those youngest ages, then you're playing for the wrong reasons. And so that's what I hope to accomplish with this book, that it's very much a feel-good story. There's some trauma as there is in most, middle grade fiction. But at the end of the day, I think the main character, whose name is Zane, but he's known as Z throughout the story. I think when he gets to the point in the story where he will only play on his terms, it's sort of a coming of age self-discovery story. I think the ending will leave readers feeling really good about what youth sports is supposed to be about.
Wow, though, it's all of those points as I'm writing them down. They're so interesting, and the evolution of sport. $40 billion. First off, that's crazy. Second off, that's just like there's so much going on for these athletes that they're getting so distracted. It's so true. And there's a lot of pressures. I'm curious, based on what the book that you wrote, but like just what you've been around, like how important, like, or how I guess, what are the pressures like for them now? I felt like pressures were pretty high when I was in youth sports because we played for a really good team. I was on a really good football team. We went 28-1 from the time I was in fourth grade to the time I was in eighth grade. Like, we were really good. A lot of kids ended up going to play D1 football from that team years later, and our coaches took it very serious. And I remember even then, it's just nothing compared to now. I remember having anxiety, which I didn't know what it was back then, but I was like in the fifth, sixth grade, and just like this heavy feeling of like needing to perform because our team was so good. And what's interesting, you brought up Harvey, you brought up the Little League World Series. Well, we had a team from Idaho that played from Boise that actually made it to Williamsport my year when I was like a fifth or sixth grader. And a lot of those kids that I played football with also competed in baseball. So it was a team that we were pretty familiar with, and they went there. And I just remember like watching them on ESPN and just how anxious and nervous they were and stuff. And just, there's a lot of extra pressures now. It's just everywhere. And so I guess my question for you is, knowing youth sports and me being around it, like, I guess, how important is the psychological impact? Like, how do these kids need a sports psychologist at an early age? Do these kids need mental performance training at an early age like that, do you think, to kind of help prepare them?
I would hope not, because I would hope that the parents would be sophisticated enough or realistic enough to understand that the kind of pressure that we're talking about should be very limited. But I also think that kids are pretty astute and perceptive, and they understand that if the family is investing uh, sums of money, and those sums are increasing as these facilities become more and more, you know, um, top of the line, because the people building them have more money. Um, I think that they have to be very careful to not communicate. I mean, as a sports father, I have two sons. They both played youth sports, soccer. The main character, and again, I should say that this is a soccer-centric book, but it could apply to any sport,
Sure.
team sport, I should say. Um, and so some of the stuff in the book is derived or is based on loosely based on some of my own experiences with my kids, and I covered the greatest athletes all over the world. So I have nothing. I certainly am not against the development of superior athletes, the gifted and talented, right? And I do believe that there should be a place for these kids to separate themselves at a certain point. But again, the reason why I chose this particular age group is because from a team sport standpoint, it's virtually impossible to know what a child's future might be like at the age of 7, 8, 9 years of age. The kid who's the star of the soccer team or the basketball team at age 8 might be an average player at best by the time he's 13 or 14, or she. So that's really why I did the book and why I chose this particular age group, because at that point is when you have to be the most careful about how much pressure you apply to these kids, how much they feel that they are playing for quote unquote greater stakes. There's plenty of time for parents to and for the kids to show themselves. If you truly have a gifted athlete, and also in combination with that, one who is driven to make the sacrifice that they'll need to make to be great at something. And when I say great, I would say, Division I scholarship great,
Yeah.
even D3 level, college sports, because statistically, it's the number of kids who are actually going to go on to play in college is tiny when you think about all the kids who are playing youth sports.
Yeah.
But I think the one thing that's happened now with the advent of all of this money coming into it and all these academies and clinics and everything else going on now that cost a lot of money is that we're applying some of the same strategies and tactics that we've seen for many years with individual sports. So like tennis and golf and gymnastics. These are sports where kids, they have specialty tutors from the time they're 4 and 5 and 6 years old. It's a whole different ball game. Those are usually families of means that can afford to do this. And whether or not their kids burn out when they're 12, that's up to them. But when you're talking about team sports, it's a completely different dynamic. And I think people have to realize that there's really no way of knowing whether your child will be, a superior athlete when they are that age. Let them play, let them enjoy it, but don't apply any of those. No parent should ever say to a kid, hey, if you really work hard, you could go to college and play college sports. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Such a good point. And what's interesting, Harvey, is like I'm in the middle of this right now with my kids, right? I have a 9-year-old currently. I have a 9-year-old, 5-year-old, and a 3-year-old. But my 9-year-old is in his football phase where even at this age, like I'm struggling because you have club sports at this age that are more competitive. Then you have the rec sports. There's not really anything in between. And so like he's kind of excelled at the rec level. Some of his friends are going to the club level, which is much more, it's a heavier investment for us parents from a financial standpoint. But that's where like these kids are already getting started at 9 years old, playing 7-on-7 football in these tournaments. You're dropping $500, $600, $700, which is fine. If that's like, I mean, these tournaments are really cool and it's good and I'm struggling with this whole concept of, okay, he really wants to take it seriously. He wants to have fun with his friends, have a cool experience, and also develop. That's the biggest piece is like, can he develop in his sport by doing this? But man, it's like, is it too young for him? I'm struggling with that myself. Is it too young for him to start like getting too competitive and not just enjoying the game and learning the basics? Because it feels like he's gotten past the basics. He's starting to excel a little bit more. He's a little above average on that front, but then it's like, man. And I'm not the only one. I see it all over the time. And I coach club basketball for 18-year-olds. And so then I look at the younger kids getting into club basketball, and it's a money pit right there. It's just a cash cow for all these people running tournaments. And I'm like, are they getting into it? Is it really killing the game? Are these kids really, like, what's the best option for the parents? And so I feel like as a parent myself going through it, it's just one of those situations where you got to have to evaluate your child and what the actual goal is. and see what it is. But it's hard, man. It's hard for parents out here. I tell you what.
It's I think it's fine if your child expresses an interest in doing it and wants to um, take the plunge.
Sure.
I think that the problem is when all the this future stuff becomes part of it, and whether that's a sense that mom and dad are spending a lot of money, I got to really be good.
Yeah.
I have to excel. Um, if you keep the finances out of it, never talk to them about like for instance, I can imagine a potential scenario where a child is on a club team and the money has been spent, and then the kid is just maybe not doing his homework or whatever, and the parent says, if you don't do your homework, you can't play sports, and we've already paid $1,000 for you to do this, so we don't want to waste our money. I mean, things come out when parents get upset, and sports brings out the emotions in us, right? I mean, I can remember a few sideline episodes myself as a parent, on the soccer field or in the basketball. One of my sons played basketball, and it's such a visible thing. I mean, one of the things that I think is attractive to parents when they're with their kids playing, these really competitive sports, is that, I mean, if you have a child who is a mathematical whiz, right? Chances are the only people who are going to know about it are the other kids in his or her class, right? But if you have a child who's pretty darn good in football or basketball or soccer or lacrosse or something, lots of people come to the games every weekend. They line the field. That's my kid out there. It's natural, it's human for your chest to swell a little bit, to feel really good about it. And the other attraction for parents is that after a long week of work, and you get in the car, and I know my kids played travel soccer. They used to caravan. It was almost like, if you ever seen the old movie Hoosiers, about the small town and all the cars are trailing the bus. I mean, we used to do that. We didn't have a bus, but we all followed each other in the cars. And so it's a very social experience for parents. And it's exciting to look forward to your kid's game on the weekend after a long week of work, dealing with your boss, whatever. So it's very attractive to the parents. And sometimes they will want this more than the child will want it because it's so much fun for them. So again, it's a really a challenging balancing act.
Sure.
And like I say, I don't think there's anything wrong with a kid moving up to a higher level of competition, provided they want to make that commitment, provided they are encouraged to not put too much of an emphasis on it so that it's detracting from, for instance, their schoolwork and, playing with their friends, doing all those things that normal kids do. And if at some point it becomes too much, to never make the child feel like, if they say, I don't want to do this anymore, or I want to go back to the rec league, like they are a failure. Because ultimately kids, and I think this is the sort of the message that's conveyed in this book more than anything, is that children will finally, at whatever age, it could be 12, it could be 14 or 15, they will determine the level of importance that they want a sport to play in their life. And they'll let when they finally reach that point where it's too much, too little, or none at all. I had some of those experiences with both my sons, and the one thing I learned to do more than anything is just listen to them.
So important, man. Like just listening goes a long way. That's a skill set just in and of itself for anybody. I've learned in the corporate sector too. Wouldn't that be nice if like leadership just listened truthfully, like listen to actually understand rather than to respond? So awesome, Harvey. I truly do appreciate your insights. You've been around athletics in a variety of levels, both as, a professional and then also as a dad. And I think that's also really cool. So you got a really great perspective. When this book comes out, The Goal of the Game, where do we find it, Harvey? Like, how can we get our hands on that one?
Easiest way is The Goal of the Game is available for order right now
Oh, is it okay already?
on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. I also have a website, harveyaraton.com, where you can read more about the book and order it through there. And yeah, that's pretty much the best way, the easiest way to get a copy.
Sweet. So I'll make sure that that's in the description here. For those who are listening, you probably already checked the description of the podcast before you even started listening to it. So you know where the links are at to go get the book. I would highly encourage anybody who's listening to this, go get a book. Go get the book and read it and check it out. It's coming up to Christmas. So like if you guys need a stocking stuffer like today, or if you need New Year's stuff coming up, like make sure to get yourselves a book for the youngsters out there, and the parents can actually enjoy it as well. So last question I have for you, Harvey, just based on all of your experience. Well, man, it's hard. I have so many I would love to ask because you have so much experience and I could dive into like the Knicks and just being around these players. But I guess, what is the biggest life lesson you have taken away from being around athletics at a variety of levels?
I would think that my biggest life lesson has been, again, much like I just suggested, that parents listen to their children, that journalists need to listen to the people that they are setting out to interview and write about. I think the worst thing we can do is go into a story with a preconceived notion. I've been guilty of that a few times. And it's always been a humbling experience to wind up, realizing that I was labeling people or presuming stuff about them. If I can tell you a quick story, very early in my career when I was working for the New York Post, they sent me down to do a story on there was the old Eastern League, which was the predecessor to the Continental League, which no longer exists. It was sort of like AAA basketball, professional basketball, and there was a team in Asbury Park, New Jersey. And Asbury Park is a tourist town. Bruce Springsteen, of course, is Asbury Park's most famous. I don't think he ever actually resided there, but he played at the Stone Pony, which is the little music place down there. Anyway, there's a boardwalk and there's a little basketball arena. And I went down to do a story on the night that a basketball player from that team in Asbury Park by the name of Fly Williams, who had played at Austin Peay, a very talented guy, but he didn't last very long. He had a lot of issues. Fly Williams, and then an old boxer by the name of Chuck Wepner, who was from New Jersey and was best known for fighting Muhammad Ali. They were going to wrestle a trained bear at halftime of the game. And so I went down there and I just made fun of the whole thing. I made fun of all the players. I basically mocked the whole experience. The bear thing was like a circus, right? But it's just like I portrayed everyone involved with it as sort of a loser. Couldn't play in the NBA, so you're playing in this ridiculous circus-like atmosphere. And then about 2 weeks later, I was in a bar in Manhattan, and there was a guy walked up to me, and he was on that team. It's just coincidence that he happened to be in a bar in Manhattan, and he had played college basketball at Fordham. And he came up to me and said, "Aren't you the guy who wrote that story in the Post about us down in Asbury Park?" I said, "Yeah." And I thought he was going to say, "Hey, great story." He said, "You would have had a better story if you had actually taken the time to talk to some of us about why we're playing on that team." He said, "I'm putting myself through law school by making some money at the same time playing a game that I love." He said, "There are some other guys on that team who have jobs, who have families, who are trying to better themselves." And in that moment, I felt really stupid because I was down there with a preconceived notion that this was a league for losers. And I always learned I tried to learn from that experience that you go into a story with an idea of what the story might be, but the idea is only uh, takes you in the direction of what the story actually is. And I think too often we think, oh, I get what that's about. I'll go down there and just find a few facts and quotes and just fit it to my notion of what the story is, when the story could easily turn out to be something not only different, but even better.
Man, that's such good advice. I am telling you right now, I'm taking notes of it too. That is such good advice. And I'm sure we've all had similar experiences to some regard, if we really want to be honest with ourselves, where we probably had a preconceived idea of what was going to happen and we got to know somebody, or we made the wrong judgment call in a variety of areas. That is such a cool story. And I actually really do appreciate you taking the time to share that, because that's super important for us to hear an actual applicable example of something from your life. So, Harvey, I really appreciate your time tonight. I've actually really enjoyed just listening to your stories and learning. One of my favorite things to do is just learn, especially from someone that I admire in this industry. It's like, okay, how can I get to that level? I know the stuff that you're doing, some of the skills you've implemented and acquired, and so I'm like, okay, it gives me something to look forward to later on too as I continue to build. So I just want to say thank you, Harvey.
Well,
Like,
that makes you a good reporter, Shane, because I mean the format is different, but the ability to listen and talk to people is that's all we ever did. You know, when we were writing for the newspapers, it's just a different medium now, but it's really the same thing. It's hearing people tell stories and providing that information to listeners or readers.
For sure. Well, I appreciate you, Harvey, and I really do thank you for taking the time to chat with me this evening. And for all the listeners that are out there, even if this is your first time, like I said at the very beginning, make sure to hit the subscribe button. I come to you every week with a new interview, and we just like chat about this with sports figures from all over the globe. And so make sure to hit the subscribe button. But I truly appreciate everybody's support for tuning in, and make sure to tune in, because we'll be coming to you next week with another one. Take care. Guys, thanks so much for listening to another episode of my show. Now, if you could go and do me a favor, head over to iTunes, give me 5 stars, and leave me a review, it would be greatly appreciated. Thanks, guys. Appreciate your support.